Hi, everyone. I'm here today with Irene Avina, one of our staff counselors from the Turning Point, and we're going to dive into trauma and the body. But before we get started, I wanted to pull up some information about the Turning Point. So at the Turning Point, we are based here in Plano, and we serve survivors of sexual violence here in the North Texas area. Our mission is to provide counseling, education, and advocacy for all those impacted by sexual violence. We have a crisis hotline. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it's staffed by our trained advocates. That number is 1-800-886-7273. So with that, I'm so excited to be here today with Irene, who's going to share with us a little bit more about trauma in the body. So Irene, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I wondered if we could first get started. If you could tell us a little bit about what trauma is and what we mean when we say trauma.
Yeah, so trauma, right? Like when we think about like definitions of trauma, we think about these kind of experiences that we have that can lead to the brain really being impacted by it. So, I really try to, I really do think that there are different ways that people can experience trauma. I know that, when we think about trauma, oftentimes we think about like war veterans who have gone off and experienced, really deadly survival things that have happened to them. But we work with sexual assault survivors, so a lot of the trauma that we are going to be talking about, or that I experience with my clients when they share their stories, is really about again, oftentimes having these places where they're in the survival mode, whether that is as an adult or even when we think about things that have happened as a child. Things that children need to survive are going to look different from what adults need. So they're, much more dependent, and even some of those things can cause trauma to the brain. And so it's really about, again, depending on the experience, it's about how the individual makes of that experience in terms of survival and what happens with the brain during that experience. And so oftentimes when we think about what happens in the brain, we think about things like the amygdala, which is considered like the fear center of the brain, right? It's where we're really getting alerts about what's going on in our environment, and telling us what we may need to do in those moments. And when I say telling us what we need to do, it's really not us saying, what is it that I may need to do in this moment to survive? This again is the amygdala, and it's one of the oldest parts of our brain that is really functioning in these moments. And because it's so old, that means it's basically one of the most efficient parts of our brain. So it's the fastest part of our brain, which means that a lot of this stuff is going to be unconscious for us. So we're not really going to be necessarily thinking about it in the way that we would, when we're asked a question. That typically, right, when you're asked a question and you're sitting there and you're thinking about it, you're using a completely different part of your brain. You're using a newer part of your brain that's in the front. It's called the frontal cortex. And that is where we do a lot of decision making, using logic. But again, when we're talking about survival, when we're talking about needing to think fast, that is a completely different part of our brain that we're using, which means we may not maybe make the same choices that we made in those moments, because those choices are automatic. They're reactions that we're having.
Okay.
And so then, yeah.
So just to make sure I understand. So when we're talking about trauma, you're really talking about those moments when people are in or experiencing sort of survival situations where that amygdala really kicks in. And that's probably when we hear the terms like your pre-reptilian brain or your flight or fight, that's all from that aspect, right?
Exactly. So that's what you think of the fight, flight, freeze, especially. A lot of our clients experience the freeze aspect of that as well. So yeah, that really understanding that, when you are in a survival situation, your brain is going to be operating completely different in the way that it would typically if you were safe, if there was no threat, right? But then we have to kind of add into the mix of people who have experienced repeated violent, dangerous situations, and maybe these things have happened when they were a child, when their brain was literally still developing, right? When this happens, then you may be removed from these dangerous environments, right? Like the danger may not be present anymore, but our brain still has a really hard time recognizing that. Our brain still very much may believe that we need to still be in survival mode, even when there may not be the same threats or danger present. So something that could be even perceived as a threat, can send us to a space of our brain is now operating in a completely different way.
Okay, I think that makes sense. So it's so much of when we talk about trauma in the body, then it's connected right here with the brain. And then so maybe you can tell me, so when somebody is in this traumatic experience that they're encountering, what are some of those initial physical responses, maybe that come from the brain, but show up in other physical ways?
Yes. So, right, when we're talking about the brain has a very intimate relationship with our bodies as well, because our brain controls everything that goes on within our bodies. So really recognizing, that's such a great question, because it can be so difficult if we're not even aware of what that looks like, what it means. I'll use the word dysregulated when we're talking about being maybe more in survival mode. We can use dysregulated, we can use activated, we can use triggered, right? All of these words pretty much mean the same thing. It means that we are no longer feeling safe. And we're not safe, we're trying to survive. And when we're trying to survive, we're not going to have the same level of connection that we would. We're not going to be using the same parts of our brain. So there are actually kind of what you were talking about, noticing the differences between the freeze and the flight or fight. We really need to make some notes about the differences between them as well, because typically, right, when we are experiencing, so we're kind of in this, when we're no danger is present, we are safe, we are calm, we're cool, we're collected. That's kind of one kind of place where you start off. But as soon as there is some sort of threat present, as soon as there's something, even if it's a perceived threat, we very much will go into this next level, right? This next level, and we can think of, the grounded as being like green. We can think of this next level as being yellow.
I'm actually I pull up that chart so people can
Yes,
see exactly what you're talking about.
visualization will be really helpful for this. Yeah. Yes, perfect. That's perfect. Exactly. So again, noticing, I love showing this chart to my clients because it really helps visualize what it means when we're talking about being dysregulated, being triggered, being activated, right? So again, like I said, you start off in this green, you're connected, you're feeling safe, you're really oriented to the here and now. But as soon as some sort of perceived threat presents itself, a real or perceived threat, right? We then move up into this space of fight or flight, right? And this is, you see right here, it says, I can. So what can I do in this moment? What can I do? I need to do something, whether that's I need to fight back, I need to run away. But also, this could look like, flight could look like, I need to stay busy. I need to stay busy. I need to work, do. That's going to help me feel like I'm in control. That's going to help me feel like, I'm okay. And when we think about those, we also really want to pay attention to what's going on physiologically, what's going on in our body. You notice there, your blood pressure is going up, your heart rate is going up. Your body is producing more adrenaline in that moment. So you're going to feel like you have a lot of energy. oxygen circulation to vital organs. Again, right, your body's just pumping as much as it possibly can, because your brain is telling your body that you're in danger, you need to survive, you're needing to do whatever it may be. And so that's going to look, right, that's going to look like a certain way. You may notice that you're starting to sweat more, right, like your breathing is maybe getting more shallow. All of those things could be pretty good indicators that you're dysregulated. But we all have limits. We all have limits, whether we are willing to acknowledge that or not. Our body will, because our body can only put out so much adrenaline, right? Our body can only release so much in those moments when we're trying to survive, that if our body isn't able to rest, if our body isn't able to recover, it's just going to shut down. So what does that mean? Is that, right, again, this presence of threat is still present, and we're doing whatever we can until we just can't. Our body can't do anymore. So we fall into this freeze, right? You can really think about the freeze when you think about things like depression, all those symptoms of depression, and you have it right here: hopelessness, helplessness, shame. There very well may be suicidal ideation, dissociation, a disconnect from what's going on. And again, looking at what's going on physiologically, your body is just kind of shutting down. Your body has no more left to give. But your body is also giving out endorphins during this time to help prepare you, because when we think about this time, we really need to think about it as preparation for death. There's nothing left for us to do in this moment, so our body is really kind of preparing us for for dying. And so that's when we think about the endorphins and the numbness, right? That's really kind of to help increase that pain threshold that we may need to experience in preparation for death. We're also noticing things like our blood pressure is going down, our heart rate is going down. Even the attunement that we have to others is not as present anymore. And that can look like someone calling your name, and it just takes you a few seconds to even register someone's talking to you. You're just so disconnected from yourself, again, right? Because there's nothing left to give. And so oftentimes we have clients that come in that are really just oscillating between the two, going from the red, just kind of shutting down for as long as they need to until, right, they have enough energy to recover, and then they come back and they're in the yellow. And it's suddenly like, okay, well, I need to do something. I need to, whatever it is, to help them feel like they're going to be okay. So then it's just doing that until you're just so worn out that you go back into the red. And so oftentimes, right, we're just seeing this back and forth between the two. And what we're really trying to do is get back to the green. If we go,
Right.
if we go all the way back down to the green and we look at what's going on physiologically, you're noticing you're suddenly able to digest your food. You're suddenly able to eat again, right? You may notice when you're activated, you may not have an appetite, but suddenly you're hungry, you can eat. You're noticing these things. Your immune response goes up, right? You're maybe not as, maybe you're noticing before you were getting really sick. You're just noticing one sickness after another. That has, right, it's your energy is going somewhere else, and it's not, unfortunately, going to protecting yourself in those moments of sickness. So you're noticing that your immune response is going up, the ability to rest and recuperate, all of these things. Oxytocin is being released. That is the thing that we utilize for bonding, right? For social bonding. We're able to really experience the pleasure that comes from a connection. We look all the way down. It says movement in eyes and head turning. That's something that I really like to notice and focus on with my clients, because that is our body's natural way of, or that's our brain's natural way of processing. So when you think about it, you think about, someone asks you a question, your eyes move, right? That is just our body's natural way of processing information. I really like to share that with my clients when we talk about EMDR processing, and that's one of the interventions that we use for trauma that's specifically made for trauma, that utilizes the bilateral, the eye movements to help do that processing that that oftentimes brings you into that yellow and the red. So that can, often be a point of hope for clients to recognize that your body has these natural ways of regulating itself, of bringing you back down. And if we understand what those things are, we can use that to our advantage in that healing process.
So real quick, so when you talked about this is the short-term impacts of experiencing trauma, but it sounds like you're saying that long-term people can get maybe stuck in these different levels of experiencing trauma. Is this the primarily like the long-term results of trauma that you guys see, or does it have other sort of manifestations in the long term?
No, this is the long term. Absolutely. Oftentimes you can find a way to fit whatever a client is experiencing into this chart. And I have seen my clients be able to, they see this chart, immediately have an idea of where they fall and what that looks like. And in terms of time frame for maybe, again, right, when we're thinking of someone who may have not experienced any of that childhood trauma, who's maybe had one specific trauma that they have experienced, they will still go through this process. They will still have a very similar process, but it won't necessarily be for as long. It can be, depending on the situations and what's going on and what other stressors that may be, accumulating when we're not able to take care of ourselves. But this really is like a lifetime for people. This is some people come in and they look at this and they're like, I don't know if I've ever even been in the green.
Yeah. So you mentioned the bilateral eye movement and the hope that that brings, because there are actually ways to go about healing this sort of long-term trauma that people are experiencing. Can you tell me some about those approaches and how they work with the body?
Absolutely. So again, looking at this chart, it's called the polyvagal theory chart. And what it really is referencing is the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is this really cool nerve that, again, just knowing the ways of which our body already has these things, we are built with these things to help us be able to regulate ourselves in all kinds of ways. So, EMDR, right, is something that I specifically have been trained in that I can utilize with my clients, but that is by no means the only way that they can activate the vagus nerve. Because again, the vagus nerve is this way that our body just naturally is able to, it's connected to the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the thing that helps us kind of calm down, which I don't want to get into. I'll maybe point out later about the parasympathetic nervous system. But yeah, again, it's our body's natural way of helping us kind of come back down. And then vagus nerve, it starts off like in our brain, right? Like the nerve is connected in our brain, in our eyes, right? Like all throughout our brain, going all the way down in different parts of our body. A lot of them are present where our lungs are, right? And even all the way down to where our stomach, places in our abdomen. So that really gives us a pretty good idea of the things that we can be utilizing in those moments. So our abdomen, our lungs, and our eyes, right? That right there kind of gives us an idea right off the bat. The breathing exercises are one of the surest ways that we can actively engage our body in a way that can help bring us down. Noticing our breaths, because again, when we notice we're starting to get regulated, we have these shallow breaths. We're not able to take that big belly breath that we need. So doing something, noticing our breath. And breathing is really cool too, because it's one of those things that we don't have to necessarily pay attention to and we're able to do. But as soon as we notice it, we have control over our breath. And control is so important. Power and control is so important when we talk about trauma, and noticing that we do have power and control over our body if we notice it can be just such a helpful way of helping us regain our control. So noticing our breath, doing deep big belly breaths, different kinds of breathing exercises that can be utilized. We can do things like even something as simple as singing. Singing is something that is going to activate those parts of you. Humming is another way. Dancing, moving our body, it helps engage and helps us feel present within our body. Utilizing sensations like hot and cold, especially when I was talking about how the vagus nerve is so present in our chest, putting something like even a cold compress, whatever you have in your freezer, putting it against your chest, you may find some immediate relief that you may experience as well. And again, right, those deep belly breaths can also be very helpful. And again, noticing that so much of this too, really finding ways to utilize slow, gentle movements. When we're noticing that we're starting to get worked up, we really need to slow it down. You can notice even just when clients are talking and they're getting kind of wrapped up in a story, like they're talking and they're almost being pulled back to the story, and you notice the pace of their speech is getting faster. Those are good indicators that they're starting to get dysregulated. Simply being able to just pause for a second and take a few breaths can make so much of a difference when we're noticing whether or not we're regulated or dysregulated.
Wow, I think that's so amazing that trauma is triggered in our brains, and yet there are so many also physical ways that we can use to help restore that equilibrium and pull us back to the present moment where we're not in the grips of that traumatic experience. So
Yeah.
I know that you all offer at the Turning Point, so free trauma intensive therapy for people who've experienced sexual assault. So I assume you go through some of these different tools and techniques, helping your clients navigate through the days to try to promote this healing. You also mentioned EMDR. Are there any other modalities or different ways that you work with clients to help them on the healing process?
Yeah, so as I've said, noticing the body is a really big part of this work. There are, so many different ways to kind of describe what that is or what modalities are used. For that, people often look to like somatic experiencing is something that's called, but like ultimately so much of that stuff is, I really, always make a point of saying that so much of this stuff, like you said, right, is these are things that can be done by anyone. People can utilize that. And realistically, that cultures, people and their traditions have been doing this for thousands of years, right? Whether that be, connecting spiritually, which can be through connection and communion, which in itself can, you are literally scientifically activating parts of you're able to do co-regulation with others physically present. Things like worship, singing together, you're actively utilizing, exactly activating the vagus nerve, but you're doing that within communion with others. Tai Chi, some slow movement, right? Yoga, these are things that have been done for thousands of years and are the things that ultimately help and work for clients, for individuals that are trauma informed, but we just didn't call it trauma before.
I definitely want to put a pin on that and at some point later dive into that, because that's really amazing, showing that, as humans, we have this history of these practices that actually help us deal with trauma that we experience. And so I think it's important to note that probably almost everybody has at least one or two traumatic experiences in their life, but it's when there are the intense or the multiple, the accumulation of traumas that really start to affect and challenge people's natural systems. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about, and this is something that I ran across, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up this chart here, but it's trauma resiliency. And so this is a chart that I found, and it's really related to children, but I just wanted to get your feedback because I think that so many of the elements that it speaks about as ways to develop trauma resiliency are similar to some of the things that we do at Turning Point, and help for adults as well as youth and children who've experienced traumatic experiences to help grow. So some of these are just individual talking about expression, and I know that you guys work with you're leading the
So
expressive arts
I
group.
was absolutely going to bring that up as well. That is another modem that I actively use with my clients. If there's any inclination of interest in any sort of creativity, I absolutely encourage that for my clients. Expressive arts, again, you're activating a certain part of your brain that really helps you be able to sit with really uncomfortable stuff in a way that can be really soothing. So yes, expressive arts, I feel so very strongly that it has in so many different ways. When we think about visualizations and expressive art, when we think about sound, the way that sound is utilized and can very much be something that, again, sound waves are impacting our body. We are having, our body's having some sort of experience when we're listening to music as well. Can be very soothing. So yes, I just want to make a big point of saying expressive arts is such a great tool and something I utilize actively with many of my clients. I'm
So
sorry,
I think,
I'm looking at some of these now.
yeah. Well, I
Uh-huh.
just think it's fascinating because so many of the tools that we use as an agency and organization to help people process their trauma are also kind of long-term approaches that help strengthen people after trauma to promote resiliency, as well as ways that if we can encourage individuals even prior to experiencing trauma can help them move through it. So things like
Yeah.
relationships and networks of community and access to basic healthcare needs. All of these approaches and tools are so important to everyone. But when I found this, I just wanted to throw it up here and share because I think there's kind of two sides to the same coin. That so many of the things that help us recover from trauma can also help strengthen us in the face of nobody.
Anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that, it's funny you said that's traumatic resiliency.
Hmm.
There's, a term that I've heard of called post-traumatic growth. That is really very similar to this of, there are these issues, there's these conflicts. A lot of this is when we talk about, okay, I think I have a way to describe this. So I saw TikTok recently. Love TikTok. And there was this person describing this thing called micro stressors. And the way that she described it was like, micro stressors are these things that happen that feel kind of small. But the more that these things happen, the more it's almost like a snowball effect. And the examples that she gave is like maybe you're working, and this is like everyday things, right? Just mundane, like you're working and your boss gives you more work than you had anticipated, but you're not sure if you're going to be able to finish all of that, but you say yes anyway. So then you end up having to stay later, and you're feeling some sort of resentment about this conflict that came up, and you're having to stay later and work later, and then you come home and now you're feeling irritable because you're so tired and you're being snappy or saying something, the irritability is going towards your partner, and now you're having some sort of argument with your partner, and now you're like, oh my goodness, what's going on in my relationship, and you go to bed, and there's just series of these things that are happening. It's like a snowball effect of things that suddenly you're at the end of the week and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm so tired, I'm feeling so overwhelmed too. And your friend asks you like, what's been going on? And you say, well, it's just the normal stuff, it's everyday things, I don't really know what's going on, it's not anything big. And just kind of this acknowledgement of how these small things really kind of just go, they feed off of each other until suddenly we're feeling all of these things. And when we're not able to acknowledge the way these connections, it can feel like, well, I don't even know what happened. Like, I don't even feel like it's worth, like, that's not a big deal. And I really enjoyed the way that she talked about this, because this is when she's talking about micro stressors, right? When we notice all these things, those micro stressors for clients coming in could very well be triggers. They are triggers that send you over. That is a trigger that sends you over. That is telling you all these things that you've been told your entire life, or all these experiences. It's informing something that could, again, right, very much send you into this state of dysregulation. And so anytime I talk to my clients and I tell them about that, I let them know, right? Like even people who may not have experienced trauma, they have an impact by, like, they're impacted by these things, even if they're not able to acknowledge it or not. But you are experiencing this. This is going to feel that much more impossible, that much more hard, that much more painful because of the experiences that you've had. And right, it's not like, all the things that we're doing, all the work that we're doing in terms of building self-awareness, working on regulation, working on conflict resolution, that are ultimately things that you're going to be able to, build on and eventually, hopefully, be able to master in some sort of way, will help you with these triggers and will help you to get to a place of groundedness. But these are also things that anybody could also benefit from, and would be able to, they would benefit from these things as well, to be noticing the self-awareness, noticing what's going on and what that connection has to your self-worth and what's going on in your own life. Anybody could benefit from these things. Ultimately, these people that come in here have no other choice but to deal with it, but to face these issues because it's so overwhelming.
Yeah. That's a great perspective, because I think that sometimes it can seem overwhelming, but you just presented some really tangible, like, steps that probably are critical for your clients in terms of returning back to that point of equilibrium, or that green area on the chart. But also, even for those who are not survivors, who haven't been through this, as individuals who start to experience things, those type of coping skills are still valuable. And knowing what they are to help someone who is a survivor who's experiencing the throes of this are really key. So I think there's a lot of application in the different tools and resources that you shared.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something, again, right? Like you said, everybody's experienced some sort of trauma. At the end of the day, we're all impacted by our emotions and what's going on with our emotions. Some people have the privilege of ignoring those things for a lot longer, and that's not to say that that's still not having an impact on them, that there aren't consequences to that, and that they wouldn't also benefit from these skills as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to share with us about the body and trauma and these different tools and resources. Is there anything else you would like to say before we close out?
No, but I'm sure we could find other things to talk about with
I'm
what.
sure. But I'll make sure and put a pin on it for next time. But I'll put some of these resources in the links, either in the comment to the Facebook video or in our YouTube as well. So people have this as references if they move forward or come across the video later. Well, thank you so much, Irene, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Amy. You too. I'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.